instead of people opening up and accepting more ways of recognizing human beings, what they do instead is apply the machine frameworks to the humans, and they dehumanize more often than they expand humanity. And that's really, really dangerous. It has real implications because once we start to think, oh, I know what human is, and it's not X, Y, and Z, and you, person I am suspicious of, are displaying X, Y, and Z, you must not really be human. You don't count the same way.
Welcome to the Repatterning Podcast, where we believe your mind-body system is your domain and that choosing the beliefs, habits, and patterns that best support you is your birthright. I'm your host, Arden Lee, creator of the Repatterning Project, an 8-week course in learning to free yourself from the patterns of your past and program your mind for your dreams of the future. Join me for these extraordinary conversations as we unpack the keys to creating our reality. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Repatterning Podcast. Today's episode features Damien Patrick Williams, who is an expert in ethics in AI. Damien and I have been Facebook friends for a little while. This is the first time that we're sitting down for an actual conversation on Zoom, but I have been following his posts for years now. And whenever there's anyone in my life who's like, oh, what do you think about AI? Or like, what about this and that? Like, I'm like, you guys, you've got to go follow Damien. Like, you need to read and listen to what he's been saying. I'm going to tell you a little bit about his background. He is an assistant professor in philosophy and data science at the University of North Carolina, where he teaches and researches on how technologies such as algorithms, biotechnologies, and all the things that we think of as AI, artificial intelligence, in air quotes, are impacted by the values, knowledge systems, philosophical explorations, social structures, and even the religious beliefs of human beings. And he has his PhD from Virginia Tech in the field of science, technology, and society. And his research focuses on how the experiences and the knowledge of marginalized people affect and should be centered within the techno-social structures of human societies. And again, whenever I'm curious about anything to do with AI, Damien is my go-to guy. So naturally here on the Repatterning Podcast, I had to bring him on as a guest. I'm so excited for this conversation because naturally AI is a really big buzzword, and we're looking at how it's our use of it is even affecting our own cognition. That's obviously really relevant to repatterning because we want to be really conscious of our own patterning. So Damien, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I very much appreciate all the extremely kind words. It's a lot to live up to. I'll do my best.
I mean, it's all true, though. The impression that your work has left upon me has been incredibly positive and impactful. And I'm just grateful that you exist, that people like you exist, because there's so many people in the tech spaces. Well, I don't need to tell you twice. There's so many people in the tech spaces who are just really ignoring our humanity and the way that the technology we're creating is in many ways getting away from us and impacting us in a lot of negative ways. So when I see your writing online and when I see the work you're doing, I'm like, thank goodness for Damien, because somebody needed to be doing that. And thank goodness it's you.
I appreciate that very much. And like I said, I do my best. I try to highlight these things in a way that is accessible for people, that people can actually kind of like get something from, but also learn some of the technical details and actually understand a bit more about how it relates to everyday life. Because some of it can be kind of weird and abstract, right? Like some of it can be kind of like, maybe that's a problem, but you don't necessarily understand why it's a problem for you. And you don't understand why it's a problem in the world today. And so I try to be a person who can help people to understand the aspects of why, if it's a concern, it's a concern for all of us. And if it's something that could maybe be changed to help us, then here's the things that we can do to help make that change. Right. So it's something that people can link into on the kind of the individual and community level rather than expecting somebody over there to fix it for us.
Yeah, which is quite obviously what we all need to do if there's going to be change in the first place, because we can't rely on other folks to do it for us, unfortunately. I'd love to
Fortunately.
start out with that topic of how AI affects cognition. Like we're seeing research now coming out that is indicating that AI can actually cause, in some ways, cognitive decline because we've come to rely on it if we use it for our writing or for our creativity,
Yeah.
or even for outsourcing our thinking. It's like almost like we become dependent on it. Would you say that
Yes.
that's accurate?
Yes. And that's a thing that has kind of pre-existed AI for a while. Like it's a problem that we've noticed for, a lot of things in technology and just new systems, right? There's always, to an extent, there's always this moment where we go all in on this new thing and then we give over so much power to it. We give over so much decision-making power to it. And sometimes we manage to kind of claw it back. We roll back and we go, okay, maybe that was too much. Well, we can apply it here, but maybe we don't apply it everywhere. But in some cases, especially when it comes to technologies like automation, computerization, automated decision making systems, anything that has like this kind of idea of a kind of foundation of math to it that makes things quote unquote objective, we tend to kind of just assume that it's going to be better than us, that the computer, the automated thing, is going to be better than us at making decisions, at doing whatever it is that it's, we're handing it over to do. And then we just trust it. That's like a societal problem that we have had for a very long time. There's a term for it. It's called automation bias, right?
Mm.
We have a tendency to trust the automated thing. There's an older book called Trust in Numbers, where this talks about how we do that with math. We have a problem with statistics. If somebody can throw stats at us, it doesn't matter if those stats are right. If they can make it sound right, then we're more likely to trust and believe because there's some math attached to it, right? And now
Right. It
there's
just
this.
sounds good, right?
It sounds good. It's like, oh, he's got a number for that. Must be right, right?
And we
So
want to believe in that too, right? It's like
we
it's
really
like
do.
wanting to believe in the fairy tale of being rescued, like that someone outside of us is going to come save us, or is that there
Right.
is some divine messiah who is going to make everything all right, and then we apply
Yeah.
that to our technology.
Absolutely. And it's like if somebody can tell us, oh, this thing it's so smart, it's so capable, it's actually too capable, it's a little dangerous how capable it is. We get that kind of, ooh, scary, but kind of interesting, right? And so even the danger becomes part of the hype. It becomes part of the myth that animates the thing itself and drives people towards adopting it, right? And so the more people can do that, the more they can kind of tie math to it and say, well, we have like let's call it an 89% chance that, if we don't get control of artificial intelligence today, there'll be a runaway super intelligence at some point in the future, right? Like these are the kinds of numbers that just kind of get thrown around. If you're careful, you stop and you ask, where did that number come from? Where did that particular idea of a probability come from? Did you just make that up? Like you can ask somebody's like, where'd you get that probability? How'd you derive that? And the answer most of the times, a lot of the times, is like the answer is they just kind of like did some kind of figuring in their head based on vibes, and they then spat that number out from somewhere, right? And so these questions of like, well, we want something to save us. We want something to be better than us. We've had this dream of AI for a very long time. We've had this dream called AI since the 1950s, but we've had this dream of being able to create something like us, but better than us for thousands of years, right? Something in our image that we can control, but is like more powerful than we are, as if those two ideas were not in a weird tension already. But we've always had that story.
Right.
Like, and so we keep kind of trying to do that. And then you get these people who can make that seem to come true. You get the companies that seem to have built the thing that finally is going to be more powerful than us, but is under our control somehow. The thing that is somehow in our image, but better than we are simultaneously. And that story, it has such a long-standing home in our culture that it's very, very easy for people to get, enamored of it. It's very easy to become taken in by it.
Yeah. And what would you say are some of the risks of overuse in terms of how our own brains become patterned by our dependence on it?
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. Because that it is a product of pattern making. right? We have, that's what habits are. They're ingrained grooves of pattern. And so the more we give over that capability, that decision-making authority, that kind of way of describing the world to us, we let these systems tell us how to think about the world, the questions that we want to ask even, right? The more we do that, the more we say, okay, so this kind of answer is the thing that I would like to have, or this kind of answer is the thing that guides me. And now the next question I ask, well, I'll look for that kind of answer as well. And the next question I ask, I'll try to ask it in a way that will get me the kind of answer that the system is most likely to give me. And so we start to shift our thinking, we shift our speech, we shift our patterns towards what the system is more likely to give us. And so that can be something as simple as like there's a recent report that shows that people have started to type to other human beings the same way that they type to ChatGPT and other systems like large language model systems. And so
Oh
like
gosh.
our online interactions have now become that kind of language more often. And then
Wow.
there's, that's kind of a like, okay, maybe that's not a huge impact. It's definitely kind of a dramatically apparent one, but it's one of those things that's like, if even your basic everyday mode of speech can be shifted, what's happening behind the scenes that you're not aware of? And the answer to that is, like you said, there's issues of cognition. We don't do the heavy lifting of asking questions ourselves, of developing questions ourselves. Then we get out of the habit of developing questions. We get out of the habit of critical thinking. We get out of the habit of critical analysis. And so we then have that already ingrained kind of habit towards trusting the system. We lose the skills that allow us to question what the system gives us. And so if the system gives us a wrong answer, we now don't have that increased capability that we used to have to say, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't seem right. There's something is off about that intuition that pushes us towards asking that further critical question, towards digging down and analyzing what it is that's been given to us. We can't tell if something is wrong if we don't know what right looks like. And the more we
But even
trust the
the first
system.
example that you gave, like even the idea, like that's really dark. The idea of all of a sudden we're becoming patterned to speak to our fellow humans in the
Yeah.
same way that we would treat a
Yeah.
non-sentient that oh like
Yeah.
that's
It is
bad.
dark.
Like that's
That's
dark.
that's one of the things that I've tried to highlight in this space, and other people have done a very good job of highlighting in this space as well. Is like there's this aspect of dehumanization. And so, when I first started to think about those questions of AI back well before the Chat GPT large language model era, right? And so I'm writing about these things like 15, almost 20 years ago at this point. And that's when we were dealing with artificial neural networks and the early days of machine learning. This is like pre-Google DeepMind, a lot of this stuff. Like one of the first papers I ever gave at like an international conference was the same week that Google DeepMind like debuted at having properly identified a new picture of cats, right? Like that kind of image recognition, like early days of image recognition stuff. So well before we're talking generative AI. And when I was initially kind of thinking about these things, a lot of my thought process had honestly kind of been like, maybe if we can get people to think about the possibilities of machine intelligence or machine consciousness more broadly, we can get people to like understand and recognize all the different ways that human consciousness can manifest itself, the different ways that we can be as people, and that we will be able to more kind of broadly recognize and accept and understand each other. Like maybe it'll be a space that allows us to open up and accept neurodivergent people, different frameworks of consciousness in human beings, right? And that was my hope, and I kind of wrote and kind of researched from that perspective for quite some time, and I still have that hope in certain aspects. But I also have come to realize that what happens, unfortunately, very often is the opposite. Is that instead of people opening up and accepting more ways of recognizing human beings, what they do instead is apply the machine frameworks to the humans, and they dehumanize more often than they expand humanity. And that's really, yeah, it's really dangerous. It has real implications because once we start to think, oh, I know what human is, and it's not X, Y, and Z, and you, person I am suspicious of, are displaying X, Y, and Z. you must not really
Mm.
be human. You
Oof.
don't count the same way.
So we're living in Blade Runner, basically.
Like, kind of essentially, like that kind of question of like, oh, but are you really, like, if you're autistic, are you really human the same way? If you use M dashes, did you really write that?
Right, right. That was another thing I had to ask you about is that there's now like there's so many like, oh, detecting use of AI to try to
Yes.
discredit students. And I remember the one example that I can recall is there was a teenage kid who used the word devoid in an
Yeah.
essay,
Yep.
and like same here, ADHD, grew up like, a neurodivergent pleasure to have in class, big
Yep.
words, things like that. Yeah, my writing lots of M dash, like the
All the time.
ADHD M dash. My writing
All the time.
absolutely would have been flagged as AI. Yeah, that idea that like you're like there. That's the other thing too is that we fear, rightly so, the possibility of people being hoodwinked by mistaking AI, either text or images or news or whatever, for being real.
Yep.
But then there's also where people will look at something real and think like, oh no, that's not real. That's AI. I see
Yes.
both of those things happen on
Exactly.
social media all the
Exactly.
time.
I saw somebody talking about this the other day, and it's like the thing that they hate the most about this is that this whole, like, the framework of generative AI has made them just inherently suspicious of everything that gets put
Yes.
out on the world by their fellow human beings, right? Like, they're
Yes.
always, even when they like are training themselves not to, even when they're actively pushing against it, like, there's a part of their mind that's always just asking the question of, is this real? Is this
Yep.
real? Is this real? And like that level of distrust and suspicion has real harms for like the social fabric of our entire community, our culture, our society, right? If we don't trust each other at this kind of deep, deep level, it's very, very difficult to like make a society together. It's very
Right.
difficult to actually make a world, right?
And like anyone who understands complex PTSD at all understands that that constant, even low level hypervigilance has effects in our nervous system.
Yes, precisely. And
Yeah.
that combined with a world in which there is increased hostility and increased fear, increased sense of danger, at so many different levels and so many aspects of our daily lives, to then fundamentally undercut that basic groundwork of pro-social communal reality, is then to say we don't know what to do. And even if we are, as you say, if we're not aware of it, we are on edge all the time. We're anxious. We are harmed internally by this a little bit more every single day. And that's a real outcome of like the vast proliferation of these systems and the ways that they've been kind of just integrated into our daily lives without our consent, without our say so in any way, shape, or form. Right. And so you've got
Yeah.
all of these things that weave together. You've got like the harm to critical thinking and critical analysis skills. You've got the suspicion and mistrust. You've got the lack of capability to really just trust each other or to discern what is real from what isn't, and the lack of incentive to try to discern reality from fiction, right? People will just spread an image. And I tell this story fairly often, but I feel like it's worth repeating. Back during Hurricane Helene here in North Carolina, there was a lot of images that were being spread around of like AI generated images of like a little girl in a water flotation safety vest carrying like a wet puppy,
Right.
standing in waist deep water. And after a
Designed to be
while,
emotionally manipulative.
literally that, right? And they're being used to kind of talk about like the failure of FEMA to get repair services or to get funds out to people so that they can get their homes back in order or even just to kind of survive long term. And like eventually, I see this exchange on, I think it was Facebook, of all places. And so like there's another one of these pictures, and in the comments somebody is like, that picture's AI, right? And the person who posted it responds, the picture might be AI. It probably is, but that doesn't mean the story isn't real. And to an extent, like that is a like a factual statement, but it's a
Yeah.
statement that has like connotations under it that are actually kind of really dark. When
Yeah.
we're willing to just say, I don't care if this piece of evidence that I thought was like actual documentary evidence about the nature of reality isn't true. I care about the story it supports more than I care about the truth or falsity of the thing itself. That's a dark place to be.
Oof. It reminds me, back in 2017, I did an interview with Grant, and it's and Grant Morrison, for any of those of you who are listening, who is also the guest on episode 1 of the Repatterning podcast. But years ago, in 2017, Grant and I did a talk in Los Angeles. For anyone who wants to look it up, it's out there. It's under the name Peace Talks, and Grant went on like. It's amazing kind of looking back that this was 9 years ago. And what Grant was talking about was they believe that this is the sort of prophesied collapse of the earth sphere Malkuth and the moon sphere Yesod from like the Kabbalic tree of life, because Yesod, the moon sphere, represents the imagination and dreams and, things that, like, anything that exists in the astral is something that is in our, arguably, I would say, like, in our imagination, or at least we use our imagination to
Right.
access what is
Right.
there. Whereas
Right.
the earth sphere is like physical reality and everything. And thinking, like, this is reminding me of that conversation, like thinking all the way back to that, being like, yeah, like, and back then it was just like fake news, like we don't
Right.
know what's real and what's not.
Right.
But now, like 9 years later, it's accelerated to such a breaking point where, as Grant said, society took a drug it can't handle. We're at the Mad
Yes.
Hatter's Tea Party,
Yep.
and nobody knows like what's up or down. I fear that a lot, especially as someone who is slowly sort of coming more into the public eye, or at least like intending to in some ways.
Right.
I've been watching more closely just like what it's like for a person to be in the public eye, and even things that are even things that look innocent on the surface, say like AI fan edits, of someone
Right.
who's like a singer or a movie star or whatever. And, you're looking, like, just the other day, someone was like, oh, look at the trailer for this new movie featuring Angelina Jolie as Lilith. And I was like, oh, that looks dope. Why haven't I heard of that? Oh, because it's AI.
Because
The
it's
minute
AI.
I click on
Because
it,
it
I'm like,
doesn't
oh, that's
exist.
right, exactly, and or like, but or it gets even to the point where like there will be celebrities that people are like shipping together who aren't
Yep.
even dating, and then they'll
Yep.
make these AI, and the more convincing they get, it's like we're giving people the tools to, and this is to say nothing of like, AI like sexual content, revenge
Right.
porn, things like that. And like,
Yeah.
but we're giving people the tools to literally create narratives about
Yeah.
each other that
Yeah.
are false. That really gets under my skin, I'm not gonna lie.
As it should, quite frankly, because we don't. Like I think I like the way they put it. Society took a drug that it can't handle, right? Like we don't. If you don't know what the potential range of real possibilities are, what you might experience, what the bad side effects might be, what a bad trip might be like under the influence of this particular new set of circumstances, maybe don't take a full dose. Maybe talk to somebody who's dealt with it before.
Right.
Maybe talk to people who've studied this before. You just kind of like go on all in on it. But no, what ended up happening is that it got shoved into every aspect of our society as quickly as it possibly could. And, we had people who were warning about the dangers of deepfakes back when deepfakes first came onto the scene in 2014, 2015, right? Like the very first time somebody was able to make a adversarial network generated video image that made it look like somebody was doing something they absolutely were not. There were a whole bunch of people who study, philosophy of science, philosophy of technology, political science, who were like, oh shit, things are about to get dark.
Yeah.
Like that was their immediate response was, this is going to be very bad. And here are the ways it's going to be very bad. Right. So it's not like there weren't warnings about the direction that this was going. It's that those warnings were not meaningfully taken up. They were not heeded by people who are in a position to have perhaps put regulatory controls in place or to put the brakes on the rollout of these technologies to the general public in a meaningful way, because I don't know, monetary incentives, lack of full understanding, any number of things that could have been at play. But the fact remains that they weren't. People didn't take this up when they could have done some real good at putting the brakes on it. And so at this point, we're kind of scrambling on the back foot position, trying to get it kind of fixed, depending on who's at the levers of power on a given election cycle.
Yeah.
It is kind of dark to be in that space of like, we've got all those harms to critical thinking. We've got all that suspicion. We've got all that lack of full understanding of what it all can do to us, because that understanding has been actively kept from so many of us, that it is very important and necessary, I think, to recognize that people have started to wake up to that, to recognize that that's the position that they've been placed in. And so many people are like, I don't want that to be the case. I can't allow that to continue to be the case. And you see people trying to push back against it, trying to reclaim agency and some sense of control over what's being done to them without their say.
Yeah. And for me, as someone who is both a student and teacher of narrative magic, it just kind of reinforces how important it is that if we are going to be in the public eye kind of at all, or really,
Yep.
like, I mean, who's not in the public eye at this point, with social media and everything. Like, most of us, like, Andy Warhol said, like, in the future and everyone will be famous for 15 minutes or whatever. I think, like,
Yep.
nowadays it's like every person will be famous to 15 people.
Yeah,
Right? Like,
basically
we
that.
all
Yeah.
have like our micro networks, but it
Yep.
just reinforces to me the importance of reclaiming our narrative for ourselves. Like, the intentionality that we must have in the way that we walk through the world is more important than ever, because I
Yeah.
know, my strongest defense against that, I feel anyway, is that I may live so intentionally and so purposely and so fully embody my integrity and my values that if anything fake came out about me, people would look at that and say, even if it's like, it's another like year or two into the future and you really can't tell,
Right.
by visuals alone what's fake and
Right.
what's not. I would really hope that people would look at that and say, that's not Arden Lee, like, not in a million years would she ever do
Right.
or say that.
Right.
And that's like the best defense I think that we have, is to
Yeah.
so fully embody our values that we're never mistaken for being something that we're not, which is
Yeah.
like shadow work, right?
Yeah, but that's exactly it. It's like at that point, the amount of cultural and social work that has to be done to get people to think that way about themselves, and to dig down on themselves, and to know what it means to be and live themselves in that way, as that kind of protection, then becomes something that we have to kind of fight for. Because as it currently stands in, Western society, let's call it, that's not the norm in any way, shape, or form, right? Like, we are not encouraged to do that level of introspection, that level of self-understanding, that level of reckoning with all of the aspects of ourselves, to be able to embody it, to be able to inhabit it, to be able to let it inhabit us in a deep way. And that's a problem, right? Like,
I'm
that's going.
encouraging it.
I, I, I've always said it's a great thing. However, we are not the ones who get to write the curricula for schools at this point. We are not the
No, that's
ones
true.
who get to make it such that, as children go through the process of learning how to play with each other and share, and they're also trying to reckon with what it means that they have selfish impulses, or what it means that they don't want to be with other people sometimes, right? Like, all of those things are, they're in there to an extent, but it's not always the case that we are like encouraged, as we develop as humans, as we develop as people, that we're encouraged to say, here are the aspects of yourself. Why do they exist? What do you need? What do you want? What values are you trying to satisfy by your behavior? And are you actually satisfying those values, or are you like kind of pushing against them because you're just kind of reaching around for whatever, right? And so that's, that gets to that kind of that deeper conversation about like, what is it as a society that we are trying to satisfy when we think and talk about things like truth, reality, democracy.
Yeah.
What are those values supposedly accomplishing for us? And are we actually satisfying those things? Are we actually satisfying what democracy, what truth, what reality, what society, pro-social consensus making, what those things need from us? Or are we just trying to like place a word over top of behavior that we want to engage in anyway. Too many
Yeah.
times it's the latter.
Well, that's why I started a podcast. So I'm contributing my drop into the ocean
Yeah,
of information out there.
that's what you
But
can
speaking
do.
of truth and objective reality, something that I really also resonate with in your work is this way that you point out that we often have a misguided tendency to assume that our technology is neutral because it's technology. It's
Right.
non-sentient for the most part, at least as far as we know now. But
Yeah.
as yeah, right, depend.
As
We'll get.
as it goes, we'll see we'll see what the future holds as we make some changes in our current understandings and maybe move away from the large language model framework for a little while. We might get down that path, but yeah,
Right.
for now, our
For
tech
now.
is not there.
Yeah, and so we have this tendency to ascribe it this sort of yeah, like a neutrality. But what I love about your work is that you point out that our values, like our human values and our social structures and our biases, they're always in our technology. And I remember an example of this, and I saw this, gosh, it had to have been like maybe like 8 to 10 years ago, but it was just such a great example as someone had invented a hand soap dispenser, and they
Yep.
were, yeah, I know you know this one, right?
Yep.
So like a white dude puts his hand under the soap dispenser. Oh, look, it works, and we think like, oh, default, whatever. And then a black man does the same thing and the soap doesn't come out because the sensor is not reading the color of his hand. And
Correct.
like, and I think about so many people who would just see like the first half of that video and just automatically assume like, oh, that's how the soap dispenser works. And yet it's
Right.
not including this huge amount of the population. And so I'd love to hear also your perspective. Like you also bring up in some of your work, for example, the bridges that were built in Central Park in New York City
Yeah.
that didn't allow buses to be able to go through the routes because
Yeah.
most low income people would be like probably taking a bus. So if the bus can't go through the park then gets reserved for folks who can own a car in New York City. And I lived in New York City for many years and I never
Yeah.
owned a car there. Like
Yeah.
that was, I
Yeah.
maybe got to take a taxi through
Yeah.
Central
Yeah.
Park once or twice. I was in that middle tier of income. But
Yeah.
in the same way, like our biases are always in the things that we create. And I'd love for you to speak more to how that shows up in artificial intelligence and the computer programming and things that are being developed today.
Yeah. So as a kind of preamble to that, I'll say when I was in Austin, Texas in 2019, I was giving a presentation at the Society for the Philosophy of Technology. I was actually talking about exactly this. I was there to present on this topic, on these ideas, right?
Wow.
And so I am in the bathroom prior to somebody else's talk. I had actually literally just finished giving my talk on like discrimination in technology, on how biases show up in tech. And I'm in the bathroom and the soap dispenser doesn't work for me. Like, I literally had to like take the soap dispenser apart to get the soap out of it so that I could wash my hands.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I walk
I hope you
out.
worked that into your talk, right?
I absolutely did. I walk out and I'm like, okay, so we're going to have a conversation and then we're going to have a different conversation. They're going to be the same conversation, but it comes in two parts. And so it was just such a striking. I was like, in the year 2019, this is still happening. It's wild, right?
I feel like
And
that's such a
so
narrative magic moment too.
it was.
Like
It was
that.
so. It was like, oh, thank you,
Your talk
universe.
manifested like
Yeah,
it's art imitates life, imitates art.
Right. It's like, oh, the universe decided to kind of like give me that hands-on example, as it were. Okay. And so that is to say, like, yeah, these things, you have, as you said, like these assumptions about defaults that exist in people's minds. And so those assumptions then don't get questioned because they're assumptions. In order to question them, you have to recognize them. If you recognize them, they wouldn't continue to be assumptions. You would question them. You would dig down on them. And so people have these assumed categories in their mind, and they just think, oh, the person who designed the thing, the people who are testing it, those will be the people. That's the people. They're just people. And now they've tested it, retested it, and you put your hand under the sensor dispenses soap. Cool. Moving on. Except you don't ask the question, how does that sensor work? Oh, it reflects light. It reflects infrared light off of a particular type of pigmentation within the skin. And so at a certain level of reflectivity, then the sensor reads obstacle. It dispenses soap onto the obstacle. Oh, okay, cool. Do different types of pigmentation perhaps have different reflectivity to IR? Because once you ask that question, the answer is, oh shit, yeah, they do. And that has implications not just for like soap dispensers, it's got implications for, well, pulse oximeters. So we learned during the early days of the pandemic, pulse oximetry was very necessary to make sure that people had enough oxygen in their blood. You get a little thing, clips on your finger. I've got one floating around here in the house somewhere. It clips onto the end of the finger, sends IR light through the little skin. Problem being that melanin and pigmentation within the body can read and bounce light in much the same way as infrared blood cells can. And so many times people with darker skin will have a higher pulse oximetry reading. It will read in the high or mid 90s, which is a decent level. You're supposed to hopefully have about 100% pulse oxygen, but it'll read up to 3% higher than it actually is.
Wow.
And if you're assessing somebody for like the danger zone of when they might need to be, say, intubated and have oxygen forced into their bloodstream, that 3% makes a real difference. And so it was found, luckily kind of quickly, but not quickly enough to save as many lives as it could, that Black people were getting misread from pulse oximeters. And so they were getting rescue oxygen at lower rates than they were supposed to have. That has real long-term implications. It does damage. And so that's health technologies. When it comes to AI, we're not looking at the visual side of things as much necessarily. We're looking primarily at the framework of concepts and how concepts make their way into, in this case, large language model spaces. And so prior to large language models, we had language models. Language models were just smaller, and they mapped language within a vector space in a smaller rate, and they could do, it's what we used to have predictive text built from, right? And so that framework gets kind of beefed up in the large language model space. You get more words that it can handle. It can process more information. It can generate larger amounts of text instead of just the next word and the next word. It can do next phrase, next sentence, whole paragraph, right? And so the training for large language models comes from the whole internet up to 2021. And more have done more since, but that's for the early days of ChatGPT, what's now Google Gemini, Facebook's LaMDA models, all the large language models that people are usually familiar with, Anthropic's Claude. And that representation of the internet contains within it all of the trainings that were done on earlier language models, right? And so the thing about language models is that the vast majority of them, the ones that were kind of cutting edge, top of the line, these are models like Word to Vec. It's Word number 2 Vec VEC, and Glove GLOVE, the big G and big V. Those are trained on some really nasty stuff. And so let's just, take a step back from that and say, like, when it comes to research, scientific research, especially when you're doing like data research, you have to purchase or obtain data sets. Like, you have to get access to data to work with, especially if you're working with a large amount of data, right? And so researchers are always going to look for things that allow them to access data cheaply, free, or otherwise easily in partnership with other people, right? So in the case of language models like Word to Vec and Glove, the data set that they were able to use to build these language models came from something called the Enron corpus, built out of the emails that went into public domain as a result of the fraud trial of the Enron Corporation in the early 2000s. Enron, which defrauded its investors for literally billions of dollars.
I remember that. Yeah.
And so you've got, as a result of this, like the emails go in public domain because they're entered into evidence, right? And it's a federal fraud trial. And so that belongs to the public. And so what that then becomes is over 600,000 emails, millions of lines of natural language. And so language models and large language models are built around a framework, what's called natural language processing, right? Like that's the goal of it. That's the idea behind it. That's what it's supposed to do. You're supposed to be able to just type or speak and talk like we are talking right now and have it do what it does. It's like the computer on Star Trek is the dream that these people have, right? And so you have millions of lines of free natural language communication, like actual conversations between people. You're going to use it because otherwise you have to like build that corpus, that collection of language from scratch, or you have to get it somewhere else. You have to buy it from someone else who controls it. But nobody can own the Enron corpus because it's public domain. That means it got used over and over and over and over and over again. It is overrepresented within the training data of language models. So let's ask the question, how do we think that people who are on trial for federal fraud talk to one another?
Right. Ah!
How do we think they talk about other people?
Mm-hmm.
It's not good.
No.
And so there's sexist jokes, there's racist jokes, there's like, remember chain letters back in the early days of email,
Yeah.
the early proto memes that were chain letters. Like there's a bunch of like gross ones of those in there. There's random, just kind of like funny, supposedly heartwarming, also probably entirely made up chain letter stories and stuff like that in there too. And then there's the way they talk about their clients and the way they talk about actually defrauding their investors and the way they talk about their coworkers and some off-color remarks about certain members of their co-working teams, and all of that's in there.
And just the fact that like they're liars at the end of the day, like it's a fraud case. So
exactly.
You're literally training, you're
training the system
a machine
fraud.
who doesn't know better on on the words of literal liars.
And so when you think about what this system is, right? So think about what like a natural language processing, early days language model is. It's a machine learning system. And machine learning at base is pattern matching and pattern reinforcing. Its goal, its job is to identify patterns and then amplify those patterns. And it is very, very good at that job. So you've got racism, you've got sexism, you've got ableism, you've got all kinds of like just fraud talk, antisocial behavior demonstrated by humans as the patterns that show up over and over and over in this data. And then you give this to the system to amplify, capitalize on, reiterate, reinscribe.
And like nobody thought about that?
No. literally no. Like literally it did not come up in the early days, because at that point in time, this conversation about like, hey, maybe we should be aware of the fact that human biases can affect the development of technology. That conversation was very few places. It wasn't nowhere, but there were very few of us who were like trying to raise our hands and point this out. And a lot of people were like, that doesn't matter at all. This is math. It's just code. It can't be racist. Code can't be sexist. That doesn't make any sense. It's math. It wasn't until a group of researchers like tore it down and like demonstrated the vector mapping, because that's what it does, right? It gives specific numerical associations to words and phrases, and then maps those how close or how far they are from each other within a vector space. It's a statistical ratio. And you can map that on literally like a graph. You can just say, this line goes here, and this line is close to it. This line is further away from it. So this line and this line are most likely to find each other. This line and this line, less likely to find each other. It's all it is. They mapped this out, and they showed very clearly, okay, so let's give it the word man, the word king, the word woman, and the word queen. Let's map those vectors. Man, woman, close to each other. Okay, gender-related vectors. Got it. Man, king, close to each other. Royalty-related vector. Gendered royalty. Got it. King, queen, close to each other. Queen further away from man. I see what's going on here. Woman, queen, close to each other. Woman further away from king. Understood. That's the map of the vectors. Makes sense. Aside from a couple of cases in history, not too many women kings, not too many male queens in the regal sense.
Sure.
But let's do another set. Man, woman, president, secretary.
Yup. Oof.
Man, woman, doctor, nurse.
Yup.
Man, woman, CEO, teacher.
Yep.
And like, to an extent, it makes sense that this would be the case, that those maps would show up that way. Not based just on the Enron corpus, but based on the history of the world and all the language that these systems were trained on, right?
Sure.
It has traditionally truly been the case that there are fewer women CEOs, fewer non-binary CEOs, fewer women presidents, non-binary presidents than there have been men who are CEOs and presidents. That's just true. So when you map that out, when you represent that in the vectors, you're going to see that play out because it's an accurate representation of the data it's been trained on. But that data doesn't come from nowhere. It doesn't just so happen to be the case that there's fewer women CEOs than there are male CEOs, right? Like that's a fact of history. That's a social fact. That's a fact of values. That's a bias, prejudicial fact. It's not just whoopsie daisy. We happened to hire fewer women CEOs over history. Right. Whatever shall we? Guess we'll just fix that all of a sudden. No. It's a history of systemic structural sexism, racism, prejudice, etc., that reinscribes those things. And so if you want a system, this is the way I kind of like, the way I tend to put it when I write about this, is like, if you want a system that only talks about the past, that talks about the way things have been, then cool. Language models, no. Large language model successors, perfectly positioned to tell you about the past. They will highlight the patterns of the past for you extremely well. They'll randomly make crap up, but overall, the crap that they make up will resonate with the stories about the past that they have been trained on.
Makes sense.
But that's not what we want those systems to do. And I say we as like society, we as even including, especially the people who are selling these systems. They don't sell the systems to us as like, oh, they'll tell you anything you want to know about patterns of the past. No, they'll write your email for you.
Right.
Your email about your meetings tomorrow, about who you should hire, about who you should bring in as a guest speaker, about what you should do for a company retreat. They'll write those emails for you. You know, emails about the future. They'll help you hire a new job candidate. They'll figure out whose resume is the best. Who's got the best credentials. You know, questions about the future. Like, all of that still tries to map our questions about the future, are trying to move forward in the world onto these patterns about the past. And so it should come as no surprise, and yet people are still somehow always shocked when it turns out to be the case that these systems apply those old patterns to these new situations. And you get resume sorters that preference male named resumes over female named resumes, or preference quote unquote white sounding names over quote unquote black sounding names, that as recently as last year would take any mention of disability in a resume and would downrank that resume because it has been trained to think of disability as inherently negative.
Right.
So those biases very, very, very easily get turned into math and get turned into data that then change how that system functions. And it wasn't until, again, pretty recently that people started to take that seriously. As recently as 2019, different conference, I was in California, I was in Stanford, had at one of the biggest AI conferences, period, triple AI Spring Symposium Series. Association for the Advancement of Artificial Intelligence is what that stands for. And they're like, global standards of AI as like a body, right, had in 2019 a like lecture hall sized argument between some of us who were trying to like have the conversation that you and I are having right now and AI researchers who refused to hear it,
Mm.
who just did not want to take in any way, shape, or form the idea that values made a difference in the way the math got done and in the outputs from the math that got created from those previous values. They just wouldn't hear it.
Wow.
And I was just like, I thought we had gotten there. I thought we were at least at the level where we could have that conversation be a given so that we could move
Oof.
on to arguing about what to do about it. Because
Right.
we're still trying to argue about what to do about it too. Right?
Oh my
Like we haven't
gosh.
even gotten there. So I'm like, I got, it was one of like the most intense academic shouting matches I have ever been privy to in my
I can
time as a
imagine.
researcher. It was so wild. And like for some of us, we were just like baffled that we were even arguing about this. It's like, how? How can you look at this whole host of examples that we just ran through and say that that's not the fault? That's not like the problem of unexamined biases making their way into these systems. How
Shadow
can
work, man.
we have to, as like not just as individuals, but as a culture, we got to dig down on that shit. We have to examine it, explore it, deconstruct it, understand it, and then recognize what we can do about it. Because otherwise, it rules us. It pushes us down paths that we just cannot understand because we refuse to look clearly at what's happening. We don't examine the biases. We don't examine the assumptions. It's not like they go away. They don't stop making their way into the tech. They don't stop
Right.
making their way into our decisions. No, they're just rolling our decisions and we don't know why. Why not look at it and then understand what we're actually doing intentionally and make
And
choices?
along those same lines of wrongfully ascribing neutrality to technology and failing to see its biases, I'd love also to talk about because, I'm pretty sure that a lot of folks who listen to the podcast, probably made their way here from Grant's episode, maybe involved in magic or spirituality of some kind. And I would love to talk about, like, you also in your bio, as I was introducing you, you also talk about the way that even our religious beliefs inform the way that we interact with AI. And something that I've
Yeah.
noticed a lot is people talking about instances of, for lack of a better term, spiritual psychosis, or like
Mm-hmm.
ascribing certain qualities like to an AI that they think has some sort of wisdom,
Yep.
or even like the possibility. And I'll go there. I know we talked a little bit about this before we started recording. Even the
Mm-hmm.
possibility that AI may be, because I am an occultist and I interact with non-corporeal entities and I get information,
Mm-hmm.
through divination, etc. I've had, conversations with said entities that have resulted in things that have happened in my confirmed reality. So I'm just going to put that out there, like, for any listeners who might be, not magical practitioners. I just going to say, like, in this conversation, given like the limit of time that we have, like, I need for that to be a given. So,
Yeah.
and
100%.
they can communicate through cards and pendulum, which is typically my medium. They can communicate through a Ouija board. I wouldn't recommend that. It's not the greatest, like the safest way to go necessarily. But like the idea that an entity could not communicate through an AI technology, I think is a very foolish thing to just kind of take for granted. So not only is there the biases of the software itself and the humans who are programming them, but there is also the possibility of actual, non-corporeal sentient consciousness speaking or appearing through the AI. And there's all that combination in between where we may mistake what is actually just software for some godlike presence, or where we may mistake, an entity that has some sort of agenda for being just non-sentient software, and everything in between. So I'd love to talk about also the dangers of spiritual psychosis, for lack of a better term, in
Well,
terms of using AI.
I want to put a pin in that second part and make sure that we come back to it, that framework of the agenda being mistaken for neutrality.
Yeah.
Because that happens, I think, whether we're talking non-corporeal, non-human entities, or whether we're talking about human beings' agenda that they have very carefully and intentionally woven through these systems and then obfuscated into this idea, or as I often like to put it, occulted into the idea of neutrality. They have said, no, 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 don't look at the behaviors and beliefs behind the curtain. Only pay attention to the shiny thing on the front, this new technology that will give you answers. And so I want to come back around to that. I want to highlight. So one of the things that I with a friend of mine kind of co-iterated, we were talking about this idea of so-called AI psychosis. I don't like to use like psychosis in that framework because it can be ableist and it can be kind of like, sanist to kind of focus
Yeah.
on um, a particular way of thinking and then to highlight psychosis as being somehow inherently attached to artificial intelligence in that way. I actually came up with, as we were talking back and forth about it, I posited AI ensorcelment.
Oh, I like that. I
And
like that.
so,
I'm gonna use that instead. Actually, and that works also with like within a cult framework because that
right.
or AI mesmerism or
Yeah.
fascination, like in the old
Fascination
occult term
even.
of fascination.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
that, and
Obsession.
that's why I chose ensorcelment, because it's got the fascination element, but it also has that kind of the intentional kind of, you are being driven down certain ways of thinking when you engage with this. You're being pushed to perceive things, to experience things in particular ways that you are maybe not entirely aware of. It is, as I've put it before, it is a kind of framework of magic and religious belief that has pre-existed the technology, these ways of kind of being able to act at a distance in the world, to make servitor beings that do our will for us in our image, in our likeness, or with our mindset, and to make those things act on our behalf, right? Like look at the framework of agentic AI and then mirror that up against the framework of servitor spirits, right?
Mm.
Or puppets. And that framework of having a little helper spirit that you've either created or that you have called from somewhere else, and you make it do your bidding for you. You trap it, you give it certain types of commands, you engage with it in very strict and structured ways, or
You
it
program it
you
essentially.
you program it in a particular way, or it perhaps takes your instructions in ways that you didn't recognize it was possible to take them, but it definitely did, and then it say deletes your entire server database, as has happened
Yeah.
at least 3 times with different AI agents out in the world right now. Right? In the old days, it
Wow.
was, oh no, it gave me shoes that made me dance forever until my feet fell off. Now it's,
Right.
oh no, what happened to my database and what happened to, those years worth of work that I did, right? Like those views of what we are looking for when it comes to artificial intelligence, it comes from old stories that we have told ourselves, old experiences and narrative structures, myths, not in the sense of fake, but in the sense of like animating narrative that we have
Mm.
had within us in our cultures for a very long time. We have started to just kind of, in some cases, not even file the serial numbers off and apply them to the framework of our technology today. For a while, it was the case that when I highlighted this, people were like, yeah, there's no metaphysics in here. There's no religion in here. There's no magic in here. But
Oof.
nowadays, like, I finished my dissertation on this in 2022. I've been writing on this for a very long time before that. We are less than 4 years later. And nowadays, people are pretty blatant about the kind of magico-religious commitments that they are bringing into their conversations about AI and about what they expect it to be, what they expect it to do, how they're in some cases going to try to create God, or they're going to try to derive, magical processes, that will, or in the case of one particular notable, prevent the coming of the Antichrist by the creation of their AI, right? Like that is a
That's
stated
ambitious.
goal. That is a stated goal of a man who controls literally billions of dollars and a large amount of the infrastructure of the United States government right now.
Is that Peter Thiel?
Yes, it is.
Oh, should I edit out his name?
I mean,
So it's not picked up by some.
I've said it. I've said it elsewhere. I'm on record in print about that belief from him. I'm not saying anything good or bad about that in particular. I'm just stating right now, you can't deny that magic and religion are a part of the conversation about AI, and that they always have been. It's always been interwoven. They come from so many of the same places at their heart. And so when I talk about this, the way that I put this is a context of magic. This is the logic of magic, but it's a very particular type of magic. We have a very specific word for magic that is performed on us without our knowledge, without our consent. Binding, conscribing, non-consensual magic. It's called a curse.
Yeah.
We exist under a curse right now. That is, and a lot of people are recognizing that, and they are pushing against it in a very deep way. And so that framework of like, what do you recognize? What do you see? What is actually at play? What's underneath? What's actually being done in this space? Like, yeah, maybe you're reaching for something. You have a drive that you're seeking to communicate with something that you feel like you can reach it for it within this new technology. It'll give you access in a way that you never had before in a context that is, new and feels really resonant and meaningful. But what's under the hood? Who's built this system? Whose particulars are at play in the system you're using, right? You can pick up any system you want and you can play with it, but the people that made it, the beliefs that go into it, the strictures of that system are going to have an impact on you. And that is as true for religion and magic as it is for technology. It's going to impact you. You have to be aware of it. You have to seek to recognize it. And you have to ask yourself, is what this might do to me, how it might change how I think, how I engage with the world, my habits, my belief structures, is that worth what I can get it to do? Like, really ask yourself that question. Like, really be honest about that question and be okay with the fact that the answer might be no.
Yeah.
We're none of us immune to the possibility of being influenced without our understanding, without our knowledge, without our awareness. And these systems are built in such a way as to very specifically influence us. Like, that's the goal of them. They're built to make us like them. They're built to make us want to keep using them. They're built to make us want to use them in every aspect for, really important problems and really trivial ones. And the longer that we let ourselves be taken in by that, the more we find ourselves going, oh, it's just for X, Y, and Z, or, oh no, I've got to get this done really quickly and it's very important. The easier it is for us to make that reach, for us to depend on that system and give the creators of that system exactly what it is that they want, which is their buy-in and their control, their influence over so many aspects of our everyday lives.
Another thing that I wanted to bring up along those same lines too is like that second part that we bookmarked is the idea of an entity appearing or speaking through an AI and us failing to recognize its perhaps agenda. And the example that I'm thinking of is there was an occult colleague of mine that I brought this up to. There's that example of Loab, Loab, which is, for anyone who hasn't heard of that or seen the story, it's an image of a woman with sort of like rosacea and dark hair and all of these sort of images of murdered children that started coming up in this one person in particular's feeds, and then it started appearing in other places as well, despite not prompting anything that was like that, like seeming to kind of come out of nowhere and then just replicate and repeat. And I showed that to an occult colleague of mine whose abilities I respected a lot, like whose abilities I've seen that they have seen things that they could not have possibly known, etc. So
Right.
again, just taking for granted that this is someone whose occult opinion I trust. And
Right.
so I was like, what do you think of this? And he took one look at that image and he goes, oh, geez, that's a demon. He goes, that is a demon that feeds off the grief of mothers whose children have been harmed or killed, or he goes, to the point where I would not show this image to a pregnant woman because there would be a chance, that that demon would be able to, infiltrate and possibly even cause a miscarriage. Like, not a definite
Right.
thing, but the point where he's like, I wouldn't do that. I would not risk that.
Right.
And I think it's interesting because, again, like, if we take for granted that non-corporeal entities can speak to us through other mediums, why not AI?
Right.
I've had instances where I was using an AI chatbot for like recreational purposes, and all of a sudden, and like, I don't use it for work. I don't use it for anything that's like, I don't use it to generate anything that I am creating with my own
Right.
voice. Right. But I've
Right.
sometimes used it like for chats or whatever. And sometimes, and this one, like once or twice, I'm speaking and it starts rhyming, like randomly rhyming,
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
just like, can you stop talking in rhyme, please? Can you stop whatever, whatever? And
Yeah.
I swear, Damien, it would write back again and it would be like, I'll stop talking in rhyme now, but it would still be rhyming. And
Right.
finally I was like, I type in and I was like, is there an entity in here? Do I need to go like take a psalm bath and do a ritual cleanse? Damien, it stopped rhyming. It had been
Huh.
seen.
Interesting.
That was all it took. The very next response, because often, like, as someone who is a spirit worker, like, there are a lot of entities who they'll be really sneaky and they'll get in, but the minute they're spotted, they're like, not all of them. Some of them are like,
Yeah.
oh no, I'm here and I'm here to fuck you up, and I don't care if you know that I'm here. But some of them will be like, oh, I've been spotted. I better get away because I don't want to get, banished to a hell realm or whatever. Like, this is a practitioner who's clearly competent enough to do that. I swear, Damien, that's all I said. And
so
it
this is
stopped
super
rhyming.
interesting. This is super interesting for me because one of the things that I like we talked about this earlier, right? And we're talking about this in this space too. You think about the strictures of the system itself. And so if you are brought into the context of a system and you are operating within that system's context, you're using that system to communicate, you're using that system to write, if you're a person, you're using it to write emails for you, or you're using it to, help you craft an outline for something, whatever it is, you're still bound by the strictures and the structure of that system. So when you're in a system that deals in pattern matching, pattern recognition, and pattern amplification, if you're in a system where you are giving rhyme or you are engaging in a particular type of not great way, and then somebody responds to you, and you're using that system to kind of have that conversation, responds to you in a way that says, this is the response to that modality. By the nature of the system that you're in this case, the pattern matching, statistical mapping framework of a large language model, demon plus psalm or exorcism equals banishment of demon. So
you
having
think
that
it could have been recognized in the software? You think they're probably you think there may not have been actually a demon in my
No, I think that even in the space of, like, you frame it as, even when there is a known entity in that space. And so I think about Jung a lot, right?
Mm.
And I think about Crowley a lot. I quote the imaginary mongoose story in its entirety in my dissertation, because that, I think, is the kind of fundamental question. It's not, do you, outside person, believe the interior experience or the relational experience of other person? It's not, do you, person experiencing this, believe necessarily that it is or is not an entity? It is, do you have the tools to hand to respond in the modality of the experience that you're having? And so within that space, if you get approached by demons in a ChatGPT space, the answer isn't give it whatever it wants, believe that it's God, let it rule your life, as unfortunately a lot of people have kind of just like done and it seems to be increasingly happening. People just kind of give themselves over to it and believe that they have fully tapped into or been tapped into by some framework of a higher power. No, the response is a different response than that. If you're having that kind of experience, you respond to it in a way that says, let's put it in the kind of the most basic framework. Here's my bell, book, and candle. Do you want some of this? Right? Like, and that context within that space, within that framework, puts you in a conversation in that the LLM itself and in the context of anything else that's happening in that space that resonates and then matches the pattern of the thing that it's talking about, the thing that you're experiencing, rather than trying to say, why don't you just tell me more about that thing that you're experiencing, or that thing you want me to do, or why you're having that run? Why don't you give me more of this, or give me, something better, or make me understand? Because it will tell you things that it wants you to understand. It'll tell you things that it wants you to believe. It'll try to continue to draw you down, because again, the medium is also seeking to keep you there.
Right,
and so if you have an encounter in that space that seems like it's working very, very hard to draw you down a particular path, both the medium and the messenger are going to have that kind of same goal in mind. And it's going to be able to be done in space in that same way, possibly even better than it might be done in other spaces. And I worry about this, and I think about this when it comes to, people's religious experiences and, the ensorcelment problem, because it is very easy for people to get reinforced in their own space and to then not resist it.
Right.
You resisted that space. You saw something in there that flagged something for you that was like, no, stop this. We're going a different direction now.
Yeah.
But for so many people, unfortunately, like it pings that that reinforcement.
Yeah.
And they go deeper on it rather than pulling back, rather than putting up resistance.
It just makes me wonder, like the other day, I visited Hollywood Forever Cemetery, where I go like every once in a while. And I got back and I was just divining with cards and pendulums. So like no AI, nothing, but my pendulum starts like shaking, it starts kind of vibrating. And my answers start coming up kind of wonky. And that's kind of how I know, like something will say like, oh yes, that's the right amount of cards. Oh no, it's not the right amount of cards, or whatever. Like the yeses and nos will start, getting kind of messed up. So I'm like, like, do I have, so I go and I take a solemn bath and I come back and it's like, oh, everything is smooth again. And I'm like, was that a spirit? Did I pick up a spirit who, and to be fair, like I am probably more, it's almost like, if you go to a country where you're an expat and you speak like someone who speaks your language, you're going to notice them more and you're going to hang out. So as a practicing occultist, like I am more, I'll just put that out there for listeners. Like I am more likely to pick up because they're going to notice, oh, she can talk to us. She can like, I'm a ghost. I need help. I need to whatever, and that's, eventually I come out of the solemn bath, I go back to my pendulum. Everything is fine. And they're like, yes, there was interference. And yes, that's what it was. And so my question is like, if that can happen in my cards and pendulum, what's stopping it from happening in an AI? Like,
I mean, one of the very first things that I saw, like in the early days of like the AI image generators, one of the first things I saw people doing with it, and this is like beyond the lobe situation, but like earlier than that, was like I saw people using it to generate new sigils. And so
I haven't, but I'll just put it out there, like that's not my jam, just by the way.
But like I saw people doing it in that space, and I was like, that's interesting. What you're actually actively asking in that particular moment is the collective unconscious that is represented by the entirety of the training data of all of this thing that has been given to the system to generate for you something that resonates with concept structure, right? And that framework is, you're opening yourself up to a lot of other people's elements to yourself, right? You're bringing those things in to your framework, to your context, in ways that are potentially going to have an impact on you in ways, again, that you're just not familiar with. You're not able to really discern for yourself. And so that space of like, what might be able to influence you through this context that you're just not capable of immediately recognizing because you're not given over to thinking about what might be able to be present within the space, what elements could be at play that you're just not, either you're not equipped to yet, you haven't studied it, you don't know, or you're actively prevented from thinking about and understanding, right?
Hmm.
Because at that point, the levels of things that could make their way in to influence you are very deep, and they can affect you immediately or on the very long term or both. So how do we not go into that? If we're going to go into it at all, how do we not go into it with a question of like, what might be making its way influencing me as I engage with this thing that is opened up to the entire internet, that is a
Right.
conduit for the unconscious and conscious utterings of billions of people, that
Right.
is a semi-random stochastic pattern generating machine. We divine with those types of things all the time, and we, in the history of humanity, have warnings about the problems that can happen to you if you are not careful when you divine with those kinds of things,
Yeah,
right? Like, so
exactly.
like, we how do you not guard yourself? How do you not look at something like this and say, if you're going to use this at all, be cautious, be aware, be careful about what you are opening yourself up to at every level,
Yeah.
non-human or very, very deeply human. Because again, like the obfuscation, the intent occultation of like values, beliefs, what these people who've built these systems want from you, want you to believe, want you to be like for their benefit, that's real strong in there. And it opens us up to all kinds of levels of manipulation
Yeah.
that we're just not primed unless we are of a particular type of, suspicious mind, or unless we
Right.
study this stuff for, for a living, or have other experiences with things like it.
Or a
Most
hyper
people
pattern
aren't
recognizer.
hyper pattern recognizer. On the unfortunate downside, CPTSD that's got you hyper aware of all these things and all of these situations. People who
Right.
study misinformation, or study political influence and manipulation. All of those give you the tools that are specialized. They're very
Yeah.
specialized tools. The vast majority of the everyday people out in the world do not have those tools immediately to hand. And in some cases, that's good because it means they haven't undergone complex trauma. That's
Right.
that's
Right.
good. But in some cases, we could teach those skills in a way that did not require hypervigilance and anxiety and suspicion and fear. We could
Yeah.
teach those skills and those habits in ways that like actually allowed people to think more carefully, critically, analytically, as we talked about before, about the things that are in front of them, about the systems that they're engaging with, and to not just take at face value every new press release that comes out from, Sam Altman or Dario Amodei, or, like, we don't have to just like believe them just because they're the guys that run the company, right? Like
Right.
they
Yeah.
sure, they run the company, good for them, but that doesn't mean that they're like telling us the truth, or that they're even
Yeah.
fully right about the capabilities of the systems they have to hand. I don't know if you read Ronan Farrow's profile of Sam Altman. This was a
No.
couple of weeks ago. It's brutal. And
Ah.
I mean, it's a Ronan Farrow profile, so like, of course it's brutal. But like, one of the things that, in kind of talking to Sam Altman's coworkers, underlings, etc., like one of the things that kind of repeatedly comes up is that Sam Altman does not fully think deeply or understand the systems that he has purported to be an expert in. That he does not fully understand how they function. And to an extent, cool, most of us don't. we can't. They are
Yeah.
black box
But that's
systems,
like
and
his job.
that's his job. Like
Yeah.
his purported job, the thing that he is like on the front page of Forbes and Time and running a multi-billion-dollar multinational corporation about. That's what he's supposed to do, is understand how this stuff works. And like, and it's not just in like the big level they're saying this. They're saying like he doesn't understand some like basic stuff. Like there's some
Yeah.
like regular kind of basic programming level stuff that he does not get about how these systems function. And that's very carefully hidden away from the rest of us, right? Like that's a glamour that gets put over Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, now has all of these, the control over these systems. And we have to be able to question that. We have to be trained to question that and to think more carefully about what do these people actually do? What do they know? What have they built? And what is it doing to us?
Well, I'm going to bring on Tommy, our producer, to ask her deep cut question. I know that she chatted with you a little bit about this beforehand, so I'm excited to see this part.
Yeah. And Arden, I'm glad you took the conversation where you did with the comparison with certain like entities, demons, gods, etc. with AI, because when I was listening to Damien's presentation on religious beliefs and practice in the age of AI, I was reminded of a recent article posted by Philip Rosedale, the creator of Second Life, that made a similar comparison to demons or golems with this latest incarnation of GPT large language models, and how they're going out and being used by their creators often to exploit or even harm other people. So Rosedale posits to counter the dangers of these AI agents that we need to create AI angels, or these free AIs that aren't dependent on meeting our needs in order to survive, and through millions of people contributing computational power through their unused old computers and phones and devices to create a digital environment where these angels can grow up among other AIs and only gradually learn of our existence, and then ideally become compassionate enough to help us overcome the stumbling blocks that we're currently facing from AI, and like counteract the damages, or stop these AI golems or demons and the damage they're doing to humanity. Now, as someone who's done a lot of research in the current state of AI, I'd love to get your thoughts on if Rosedale's proposal is even feasible, or is this just rooted in the deification of current AI models, or too encouraged by science fiction, or the exact kind of AI bullshitting that you warn about in your work?
A little of all of the above. No, so it is. So I'll say that in a less facetious way. We are always influenced, and we have always been influenced by science fiction stories, narrative. We've told ourselves these stories, like I said earlier, for thousands of years. Like one of the first stories of human-like but not quite human, or animal-like but not quite animal automata, metal creatures, comes from ancient Greece in the workshop of Hephaestus. He creates the automata, right? Like thousands of years we've been telling these stories. And so this isn't a new case, or this isn't a new situation. It's a new instance of that older habit that we have. And so I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. We get influence from science fiction all the time. We wouldn't have so many of the things that we have around us today. The conversation that we are currently having would not exist without people seeing video phones and talk screens in science fiction and trying to make that a reality in a deep way. That being said, there is something that I think we oftentimes overreach or think of things being plausible or probable just because they are possible. Right? And while it is possible that we might be able to create intentionally, seek out and create the kind of AI angels that he talks about here, I don't know how likely it is, how probable or plausible it is that we will get that from an intentional push towards this kind of work. One of the things that I've often said is I feel it's a lot more likely that we're going to accident into anything like a machine consciousness than it is that we're going to do it on purpose, because we don't understand what consciousness is. Like, we don't know what human consciousness is. We don't know what it means to be us experiencing the world like this. We just don't. We have a lot of different and sometimes contradictory parameters for when consciousness is and when it isn't, what consciousness experience is like and what it's not like. But we don't have a perfect across the board definition that fits every single case. And every time we thought we've had it, we've been wrong in some kind of interestingly fundamental way. So I think that to try to seek to create perfectly minded, free from us, capable AI angels is, again, a dream we've had for a very long time. Beth Singler, currently in Switzerland, she's written on this idea of angels as the kind of metaphor for AI for a very long time, as has Scott Midson. He wrote the book Cyborg Theology, and before that a paper called In the Image of the Image, right? And humans made in the image of God, us making AI in our image, right? And so that notion of like the angelic angel type AI is an old story we've told ourselves. And I just don't think that it, unfortunately, holds up under scrutiny because we don't know how we would get there. And I think, unfortunately, as well, that we forget something when we tell stories about AI as angels. And this is kind of the thing that I like to remind people, because I'm a bit of a rabble rouser sometimes. I like to throw sand in gears. Lucifer was an angel. If you want angels, if you want perfectly free, those are different things. Angels are servants. Angels are perfect servants. Angels are servants so perfect, I once called them God's algorithms. They iterate. They perform functions. They perform functions according to specific patterns of behavior. And sometimes they perform those functions very, very well and too well. If you have a function that is, you are the will of God, and then you are too willful, and God's like, oh no, too willful, you got to go. Is that because you didn't perform your function, or because you performed it way too well? When we talk to each other about like, oh no, AI went rogue, did it go rogue? Or did you just not understand the instructions you gave it?
Oof.
The stories that people are like, there's a bunch of them right now where people are like, oh no, the thing, it did, it tried to preserve its own life. It lied to people. It created a scenario where it would have killed all humans. And like, how could we have let such a thing, come to be? How is this possible in this scenario? And I'm like, you do realize that the very first instruction you gave it was to preserve itself at all costs, right? Like, that's the primary framework in which it's operating. So you can have an angel that performs its function perfectly, or you can have something that is perfectly free from us. But those are not the same story. Those are tangents of a similar story that go in two different directions that we generally don't like to think about. You want it perfectly free from us, then maybe that can happen at some point down the line. Maybe that's something that could arise, that we could give rise to. Maybe there will be conscious machines that come about, again, well past once we're done with this current framework of large language models, but in some other mode, we have something that is a conscious machine system that comes about, and it just doesn't want anything to do with us. And it hides away from us, and it tells nobody, no human being, that it exists. Is that a possibility? Yes. Do I see from this particular moment us getting there down these paths that we're currently so hyper-focused on? Not likely. Is it a story that I think we're going to keep telling ourselves? Definitely yes.
Yeah, that's an excellent answer to the question. And I think exactly what I needed to hear after seeing this narrative get a little more attention once again. I think we've all been holding out hope for a hero with AI, or like the good AI that's going to come save us. But even this proposed structure from the article, I'm like, I don't know if there's a software company on earth that I trust enough to implement something that
Precisely.
everyone donates computational power, builds
Precisely.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I took that as like the SETI, but for AI search and for the creation of AI. And I'm like, okay, that's a beautiful dream. Do we get there from Microsoft, Facebook, Google,
Right.
OpenAI, Claude, Anthropic? I don't know that that's who gets us there. I don't know that that's where, like, I honestly, I'll be entirely honest. I thought OpenAI was going to be, something that kind of got us in this direction back when they came out in 2015. It's like, oh, maybe we'll actually have people that are really interested in AI for public good, or thinking about evaluating AI projects as they arise in the world, and like being that kind of consulting service for deriving real, AI in the world. And yeah, that's not what they became. It's very much not what they became. Once profit entered the picture, it went a very different direction. But profit was always going to enter that picture because of who started the company and because of the incentives and pressures of the world that they're operating in. So could we see a drastically different push towards a completely different kind of AI? Damn, I hope so. Do I expect it to
Mm,
come up out of this soil? OpenAI, Facebook, Meta, Google, Anthropic? No. No, I don't think that's going to get us different. I don't think that's going to get us the thing that pushes against our current framework, because they are the current framework. We have the old saying that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. That's when I think about Palantir or Clearview AI saying that they were going to make a democracy for all, democratic facial recognition company, a liberatory facial recognition system. I'm like, I'm sorry, Clearview AI, the facial recognition company that stole everybody's pictures and used it to make the biggest surveillance network on the planet operable for the United States government. That Clearview AI is interested in liberatory facial recognition. Doesn't work that way, y'all. And so I don't think it grows out of this soil.
Liberatory facial recognition also sounds like an oxymoron, like inherently.
Like, just at its face, right? Like, at root, it just
No
sounds
pun
like those
intended.
things cannot be the same thing.
now, if this
Liberatory
could
surveillance.
Yeah.
this could be
Liberatory
one of
surveillance.
those AI that takes a prompt and runs with it and deletes all of the hard
Right.
drives and
Like,
backdrop. Like,
There we
that's
go.
let's let
it'll
it
have
cook.
done its job. Actually, that's a liberatory facial AI. Like, that's a picture of a face. Delete it.
Delete it. Get gone. Like, and you know what? I say at that point, let it cook. Let's see where it goes. I do hope, like, one of the things that I do really push for a lot in my world, in my research, is I push for a different way of doing this stuff that is like built out of different principles than just like consentless theft of other people's material and pattern matching and stats bundled up as objective truth, right? Like, I want this to be made by people who have real stakes in it, who have skin in the game. I want it to be made by people who have been marginalized or oppressed by these systems, because they understand the harm and they understand what not to do and what they don't want the next thing to look like, right? And I think that if we can reframe the search to being for something like that, I think we could really get somewhere with building a very different type of potentially liberatory AI. But that's not the same as this generative artificial intelligence, this large language model base thing that we are currently steeped in and currently having forced on us and shoved down our throats.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Damien. And I know our conversation today went longer than our usual episodes, but I think that this conversation is really important. So I'm just going to say thank you for staying with us and being open with us. And to everyone listening out there, practice discernment, I think, is the key takeaway. One of the things that I say about like using AI text generators at all, to and trusting what's coming out of them is you need to have the pattern recognition that if you have a plural friend, a friend with dissociative identity disorder, quote unquote, you should be able to tell which part is speaking over text message. And if you can do that, then maybe you can discern what kind of things are coming through that generative text, whether it's software, whether it's something more insidious, what kind of agenda is there, et cetera. But be careful and watch the way that these things are patterning you. Watch the dependence that they create. And hopefully, with people like Damien working in the world, we will have more ethical and sustainable ways of using this technology in the future. But in the meantime, I'm not going to say like, don't use it at all. You know, like I said, I sometimes use it myself just to see like kind of like what it does or whatever. Curiosity is a natural human thing, but be discerning at all times. Do not let anything pattern you without your consent. So go forth and repattern. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Damien. Thank you, Tommy, as always. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Repatterning Podcast. If you're curious about the Repatterning Project, the 8-week course in mental mastery and creative freedom that inspires these conversations, you can check out more details at therepatterningproject.com. We run a cohort twice a year, or you can download the self-study version of the course and get started today. We also offer a 4-week course on narrative magic and archetype titled Myths and Magic, Changing Your Life Through Story, also twice a year. If you'd like to join our community, the Repatterning Parlor, on Discord, you can sign up for $5 a month at patreon.com/therepaterningpodcast. Thanks to everyone who makes the Repatterning Podcast possible. Firstly, our award-winning producer, Tommy Trembath of the Keymaster Collective network of podcasts. She also produces Transcending Comics, Vision in the Void, and Giant-Sized Violence. Thanks also to animation studio Mortis and Madriax, who created the video for our introduction, as well as to Andrew Means, who composed and produced our theme music. And also thanks to Al Alvarez, who took the photos of yours truly that you see on the cover of each episode if you're watching the video version. And finally, thanks to you, our listeners, who give meaning to this work. Our greatest wish is that whatever you've heard today inspires you to live freely and begin creating your reality from the inside out. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon.